Rudy Gay, UConn legend, officially retires. You're locked on.
You are Locked On UConn, your daily podcast on the UConn Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Thanks for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Before we dive into today's show, I want to take a quick moment to ask for a small favor. If you're enjoying the content, please take a second to subscribe and follow wherever you listen to your audio versions. It helps the show grow, and I genuinely appreciate your support. Every follow, subscription, download not only helps build UConn's NIL initiatives with Bleeding Blue for good, but it helps build our community in the Locked On world. So here's something else I'm excited about. I'm donating 10% of all revenue to Husky Ticket Project. Super excited about that. We're proud to partner with them. It helps sends kids to games and makes a real difference. Thank you for being a part of this journey and for making Locked On UConn your first listen every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Okay, we're going to bring in Dan Meehan. He is my co-host a couple times a week here on the Locked On Network and does a ton of stuff behind the scenes. Really appreciate all his efforts for the Locked On brand. Rudy Gay retires. He played in the NBA for 17 seasons, retired after last season, but officially now he made the announcement that he's done, not playing overseas, anything. Played for UConn from 04 to 06, had a successful career, earning tons of awards and accolades. What's your first thought when someone says Rudy Gay?
I think of the windmill breakaway dunk at UConn. It's the most famous Rudy Gay clip I think that I've ever been a part of. I remember watching it live and just being so jacked up as a kid. He was, I think, post 03-04, that Ben Gordon Emeka, great college team that won it all. I felt like, similar to the snowball of effects that we've had with the recruits coming in now in the Dan Hurley era, that was kind of the snowball effect of the Jim Calhoun era. Obviously, you had 99 team that won it all, but 03-04, UConn and Jim Calhoun recruiting wise really started to pick up some steam. And I felt like Rudy Gay was one of those really top end elite recruits, one of the first ones in those mid 2000 years that Jim Calhoun got. And he just had such an exciting 2 years at UConn, consensus parade All-American coming out of high school, was one of the top recruits in the nation. He was a Big East freshman, all freshman team, 05-06 all Big East. And then just an incredible player, and then one of the top 10 pick in the NBA draft. He's one of the most special, important players that's ever come around to the program. So salute to you, Rudy Gay.
Put his picture up right now. Want to throw that on there if you're watching on YouTube. Put it up there. Not the greatest picture in the world, but look, it's from 12, 14 years ago. So we're
when you say number 22 at UConn, everybody knows who you're talking about.
You're not, mean Antrick Kleber of the 1998-99 team.
Rudy Gay. I hope
that. Yeah. Honestly, that's the first 22 I think of. What's so funny is you mentioned that, like when we, as like a kid, like when all the players would go. I had a Ray Allen 34 jersey that I still have, right? But when Suleiman Wan took it, I would just be like, well, it's a Suleiman Wan jersey. Like it just
that was the best part of being a UConn fan as a kid. They didn't
True.
put the names on any of the jerseys, so if you get a popular number, you can reuse that one for years. I have friends, and I know myself. I used that number 34 jersey for years.
For sure, and then Ben Gordon was Jeff Adrian, Ben Gordon.
Yep.
And then it kind of goes from there. Honestly, I love Rudy. I think he was a fantastic player. People are gonna be like, dude, you always go. I always go negative. Honestly, man, you know what I think about? I think about the Elite Eight loss. Like I really do. Like he is by far one of it. If it's not him or Donyell Marshall, it's literally he was probably the most athletic and versatile player that we've ever had. Not from a like anything other than pure athleticism. 6'8", he could get a shot anytime he wanted. He could do windmill dunks. He could shoot from three. He could defend. He'd probably play all five positions if he wanted to. But that team kind of sticks in my craw because that was a national championship capable team.
One of the greatest teams in UConn history, unfortunately, that never won it all.
Yep.
They got close, and that team was just absolutely stacked. I think it was the last year Denham Brown was on that team.
Yep.
Marcus Williams. They rocked the old school UConn jerseys that year. Yeah, it was a bummer that team didn't win it all because we were really on a roll, stemming from the '99 and then '04 championship teams. Just so many likable, classic UConn players that are, and held in high regard now. I don't know if Rudy's name will get raised to the rafters, but he's someone that will go down as an incredibly important player in that lineage of guys that were coming in early 2000s, mid 2000s, and really started to stack up the list of NBA players that Calhoun was bringing into UConn. He was one of those guys that did special things in college, was only there 2 years, but almost had more potential as an NBA player. And was started one of those first guys in the mid 2000s that UConn was bringing in that had big time, 6'8", 220, can jump out of the gym, just a really good profile for the NBA game type of player. And Rudy helped build kind of that legacy of guys that were coming to UConn and that we were putting into the league. And so it really started. And then you get Charlie Villanueva, those type of guys that we were putting into the NBA, and he's an important recruit for that reason.
Without a doubt. And like to just kind of go back to that team, these names, these are the NBA players on this team. On one team, Marcus Williams, Rudy Gay, Denham Brown had a cup of coffee, but he's a pro. So there's 3. Josh Boone, first round pick, Hilton Armstrong, first round pick, Jeff Adrian, and Rashad Anderson. So you had 6 to 7 NBA players. I don't think Rashad ever played in the NBA, but he played overseas. You had 7 pros, and then you had Easy Ed Nelson. You had Craig Austrie. It was a team that was one of my favorite teams ever because of the talent that they had. It was also one of the most frustrating teams to watch too because of what happened. But at the same time, now it's been so long. I would much rather celebrate how amazing they were than like the memories that we have about that awful loss to George Mason.
And Rudy had a long tenure career, man. He played under Popovich. He played on he played on 2 gold medal winning FIBA World Cup teams. Yep. He had I think close to 15,000 points in the league. Played a long time, made a lot of money. I ran into Rudy. This was, I think, late second half of the St. John's game in the hallway. It was kind of eerie. Nobody else was around at Madison Square Garden this past year at the Big East tournament, and I ran into Rudy and just told him how much I loved him at UConn, and he was a super nice guy. So shout out to Rudy.
Yeah, and if Mark D'Amelia is watching, I know you're friends with him. We'd love to have him on. And I've already messaged you, so we may have to clip this and send it. But yeah, to recap before we move on, 8th pick in the 2006 NBA draft to the Houston Rockets, but was later traded to the Memphis Grizzlies. Played for the Grizzlies, the Kings, the Raptors, the Spurs, and the Jazz. He averaged 15.8 points per game, 5.6 rebounds, and 2 assists per game in his career. Was a phenomenal player at UConn, and I do agree with you. I hope his name gets lofted into the Raptors, the Raptors, number 22 at UConn. When we return, we're going to talk about Eric Reibe again and his phenomenal interview with us here at Locked On UConn. I want to get Dan's reaction to it, and we'll go from there. Looking to catch a UConn game live with the Game Time app? It's easier than ever to get a great seat on also at the best price. And here's the deal: use the promo code Locked On UConn at checkout, and you'll save $20 off your first purchase. Game Time makes buying tickets stress-free with last-minute deals, clear views from your seat, and the lowest price guarantee. Don't miss out. Download the Game Time app. Grab your tickets and experience the game live. No more home football games, but use this as the upcoming season starts for UConn men and women's basketball. Again, that's promo code Locked On UConn for $20 off your first purchase. And we're back on Locked On UConn. Dan Meehan from Exit 68, contributor to the show. So we had the big man, Eric Reibe, on yesterday. I thought he made a really great impression on UConn fans. He made one on me. What was your initial thought process when you saw him? You watched the whole thing. Give us your feedback. What were your thoughts?
Yeah, first of all, thanks for Eric for coming on the show and taking the time. I know he's got a busy schedule with class and practice and basketball and all that. So Yeah, I thought the interview was great. Great impression. He seems like a really well-spoken, media trained athlete, and he's going to be a tremendous player for UConn. I'm excited to see how they display his skill set. I was impressed with how he talked about battling some of the adversity as a player. He talked about some growing pains growing up playing basketball, working through a few injuries, but not getting too down on himself. He seems like he's got a good team around him and a good head on his shoulders. He used some of that adversity to turn it into kind of an opportunity to get better and grow as a person, as a player. I thought that showed some maturity on his point, on his end, and he made a couple comparisons to just Klingon and some of the visits he took to the Stores campus. Went through a couple of the things that him and the coaching staff there talked about when he would visit campus. So that's a good listen. Yeah, what did you think? I thought he displayed a tremendous amount of maturity as a young athlete. I'm excited to see how he kind of puts it on the basketball court at UConn.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. I think I expected nothing less from him, especially just like looking at his quotes from the past about during the recruiting process, he kind of just had his head down and was just focusing and let everything kind of take care of itself. He seems like the type of kid that kind of lets things roll off his back, but that doesn't take away from his intensity on the court. I only dove into a few kind of like nuanced basketball related topics initially, but I probably could have spent an hour with him talking about the different sets that he's going to run and actions that they're going to try to get with him. But I also think that I also didn't want to have him come in here and essentially tell everybody what Dan Hurley wants to do with him and kind of give away all the trade secrets. But we got a little peek behind the curtain, which was nice.
Yep.
And but not too much. I wanted to make sure we're respectful of the UConn brand in that respect. So I think that was a cool moment. And I also was really kind of taken aback by not really taken aback, but like his comp is Kristaps Porzingis. But I also thought it was pretty interesting. We got to get Niels Giffey and him together. Like, come on, like that's the connection.
2024 Olympian.
Yeah, he's going to be playing on the German national team at some point in his career. Their paths have to cross at some point, and then the UConn connection's there. I understand it's a different coaching staff, but Niels is obviously a part of UConn lore, winning championships here. So I think there's definitely kind of a natural connection there if we can make that happen. So if you're watching this and you have a connection to Niels Giffey, if you went to school with him or whatever, that'd be cool just to connect those two, and I can set that up if you guys need to. So, but yeah, those were kind of my biggest impressions.
Speaking of the Porzingis comp, I found that interesting. That's obviously a little peek into who he sees himself as a player. He made a couple nods to Donovan and what they were able to do with Donovan from the time that he got to campus, but until the time he left, he became a really complete player. Eric probably sees himself as a little bit more of a shooter, maybe a little bit more fluid with a allowable trigger, shooting the basketball a little further away from the basket than Donovan was. They didn't need Donovan to do that, but he became a pretty fluid shooter and has displayed that in the NBA now. But the Porzingis comp is an interesting one. Eric's already 7 feet tall, and he's got a good fluid jump shot. And he made a nod to German legend Dirk Nowitzki on the pod, and how he was such a inspiration for him growing up. I visited Germany a number of years ago and drove through Dirk's town, and it is in the middle of nowhere. So the fact that these guys are coming out of these places in the world and becoming world-class basketball players is incredible. So I thought that was cool. He said he's working on his fadeaway, the Dirk lefty fadeaway. So look forward to seeing that on the court at UConn.
Yeah, I had to make a comment. I said his answer to that was perfect too. By the way, I said, what happens in the game if you take a fadeaway? And he goes, well, if I make it, Dan Hurley's going to be happy. Coach will be happy, but it's got to go in. So yeah, he seems like a really cool kid. Really good head on his shoulders. I love, like you said, I loved his comments on adversity. He, you could even tell, like, there was one moment where I probably caught him off guard, where I asked him about the differences between UConn and some of the other schools. And I think he was like, it's kind of hard for me to answer that. And I think that's not like a language thing. That's more just like respect to, to Creighton, to Kansas, and to Indiana, the places that recruited him. So to me, that just shows his character. Like, he's not trying to rub it in anyone's face that, he went to UConn. It was just the best decision for him. And I love that. And I think you can kind of just tell that these are the kids that Dan wants to bring in, is that they're not, they have that dog mentality, but they're not in a way that is offensive or trying to kind of, be condescending towards other people. It's really just about, listen, UConn's about business. They stand on it and they win championships. And I want to do the same thing. And I think he represents that to the fullest.
Without question.
All right, man, let's move on, because we got some not necessarily big news, but it's an interesting thing, whether these preseason awards. And I think this was also something that was talked about a little bit, that UConn is the betting favorite, but we have some numbers that we want to add to the mix. And we'll talk about Ada Mahaney on the Jerry West preseason watch list. That's the best shooting guard in the country. I think there's some interesting names on that list that I want to talk through. And I think I'll save it for the segment, but I have some thoughts. And we're back on Locked On UConn. Dan Meehan of Exit 68, contributor to the show here. We're talking the UConn is the betting favorite coming into next season. There was all this talk about should it be preseason number one. Dan professed his frustration with it, whatever. Right now, the current odds are UConn plus 850. They're tied with Kansas, who's also at plus 850 for the NCAA tournament odds. And who's that with? Is that with BetMGM?
Yeah, this is via BetMGM. These odds just came out today. So we've got UConn at the top, plus 850. Kansas also plus 850. Duke plus 900. Alabama plus 1200. Rounded out by Houston, Gonzaga, North Carolina, Baylor, Iowa State, and so on and so forth. So, yeah, they're top. They might not be number one in the AP preseason polls, but you might want to listen to Vegas a little bit more than those preseason polls. They seem to know, have the answers to everything. So yeah, UConn tops that list for the national championship, and then the odds to win the Big East regular season also via BetMGM. UConn plus 125, Creighton plus 375, excuse me, St. John's plus 550, Marquette plus 800, Xavier plus 800. So take those for what you will, but yeah, UConn tops both the Big East regular season odds along with the national championship. So.
And I have to say this because you unbeknownst to you use BetMGM, but our sponsor, not of this show, but of Locked On, is FanDuel. And if you go on FanDuel right now, you can get UConn to win the national championship at plus 1,100. Those numbers have fluctuated, and I think a lot has to do with some of these scrimmages. Guess who is the top dog on FanDuel? It's Duke at plus 950. So. Just for what it's worth, if you're
had a big blowout, I think last night or the night before, in one of the secret, quote unquote, secret scrimmages that are going on.
Not so secret televised scrimmages. But my point is like, if there's so many sports books now, if you're doing future bets, use FanDuel if you watch this show. But you can do your own research, probably get the best deal at a couple different places. Also, they have those profit boosts and everything that come with it. Not a bad play.
I've already put in my FanDuel dual bet parlay for both the men and women.
I have too.
In tandem, I got that at plus 3,800, I think. So check out the FanDuel odds. They tend to be the better ones.
There you go. I think that's an interesting one. And I don't know if I agree with where everybody is, but I don't care enough. I think UConn's exactly where they need to be. I think Duke numbers are always overinflated because they're Duke and they get hype. Kansas, same thing. I think Alabama's a little low at plus 1,200. I think that team is going to be pretty tough. And even Gonzaga, like if you're a Gonzaga fan, at some point you got to think that they're going to break through at some point, right? Because we were in that. Once
they rip through the conference schedule, they'll be top 15, top 10 at some point for sure. They always are.
And I also feel like too, like I always make this point, like. We could have stayed similar to what Gonzaga was, right? A team that gets to the Final Four or gets to a title game, but doesn't get over the hump. And
I think Mark Few has the record of most consecutive NCAA tournaments made with like 28. He's never not made the tournament since being the head coach at Gonzaga. It's tremendous, but
it's a great school and they've done a good job. But my point is like like once you rip that championship Band-Aid off, sometimes the floodgates open, and then there's kind of like, there's like a relief, and then it's just, you do what UConn does, right? And I think that kind of like split happened a long time ago, and at some point, I think Gonzaga is going to win a title.
Despite where UConn might have landed on the AP preseason polls, whether they're number one here, I think that they're the betting favorite for the reason that you said. They get it done once they get to the tournament time. They close. Some of these other teams, obviously Bill Self's got a championship. They're right there at plus 850, the same as UConn's odds. Duke just below. I think Duke's team is going to be really good. I think they will be there in the end. I don't know if I have them in my Final Four just yet, but some of these other teams, Alabama, Houston, Gonzaga, UNC, Baylor, these guys have all been there before, and all these teams have probably the best coaches in the country that have navigated the national tournament before. So I'm sure there will be a few others that kind of break through, maybe with some coaches that you haven't heard of before, some players you haven't heard of before that will break through throughout the season. But before this season gets started, these are kind of the teams and the names I think that everyone would have predicted that would be there. And I think some of these squads will be there in the end. Yeah,
Bill Self has, just so you know, Bill Self has two. He's got one, 08 and 2021. And then the interesting thing about some of these teams, the reason why I put Alabama as like if you're going to get odds, and they're plus 1,400 on FanDuel right now, I'm taking them. If UConn's not available, I'm taking Alabama because they have a coach.
I like the roster. I love the coach.
Yeah, their coach is similar to Dan in the respect of how he uses analytics and kind of modern and old school feel. Plus, they have their point guard back, who's an All-American. They have added pieces. They added Cliff Amarui to kind of solidify a defensive side. And then if you look at these other teams, Kansas has to figure out a lot of this turnover that they haven't been able to do in the past. Duke's reliant on 3 freshmen. They're essentially their veterans are people that played at the Big Ten at Purdue and Syracuse. I don't know if I trust those guys to kind of like give you that veteran presence. Then you have Houston, can't throw the ball in the ocean, plays great defense. Gonzaga, can they do it? North Carolina's always kind of like feels like they're a step behind. Baylor's another good one. Scott Drew, he's done it before. That they're at plus, I think, 2,800 on FanDuel or plus 2,000 on this. So there's some good opportunity to make some money if you want to throw a flyer on some of these. But I would just be careful on who you pick, because go with some known commodities that have done it before and are returning players.
Speaking to that, it's not only just the roster. This is something that I highlighted last year during the tournament. When you're talking about navigating a national tournament and getting to a Final Four, in college basketball, you need the coach. You need the coach that there's very rarely a team in NCAA basketball history that breaks through with a coach that you've never heard of before. It's typically going to be a guy that has either won a national championship or is on the cusp of that. So not only do you need to trust a very talented roster to navigate those waters and get to the end of the tournament, you need to have a coach that's been there before. So I think UConn, obviously winning 2 straight, they've got Dan Hurley. He knows the game. So no secret why they're the favorite. Kansas, Bill Self, he's got 2. Duke, I think they're going to have a supreme roster. I do think they're loaded. Is the roster good enough to overcome maybe some of the shortcomings that their coach brings to the program? I don't know. Bama, I love Nate Oates. I think he's one to watch. I think that guy's going to win a national championship someday. I don't know if it'll be this year. I don't know if it will be with Bama, but he's a guy that Dan Hurley lauds and loves how he runs a practice, sits with him in recruiting, games, watching players on the road.
They're pals.
Yeah, big time. Houston, Kelvin Sampson, like you said, incredibly defensive team. I don't know if and when that's going to break through in the national tournament in a Final Four. You got to score points. When you play a team like Duke, Kansas, or UConn, you got to score more than 60. So we'll see if they're able to get it done this year. Gonzaga, Mark Few, I don't know if their talent's going to be able to hang with some of these top-end teams. They're going to be in the tournament. They're going to win some games, but we'll see, how that roster plays out. UNC, I think they've got veteran guys this year. Hubert Davis, obviously a good coach. He's proved himself over the last few years. And then Scott Drew at Baylor, he's done it before too. So I think it's incredibly important to have the coach and the high-end talent, and you've got to meld both of those to hoist the banner.
You're right. Before we go, we have one more UConn player that got a 2024 preseason top 20 watch list. It's the Jerry West Award. It's the award that is named after the logo himself. Jerry was a All-American at West Virginia. He averaged about 25 points per game and 13.3 rebounds in 3 varsity seasons. Led the Mountaineers to the NCAA finals and captured the tournament's most outstanding player award in his senior year. Was consensus All-American and led West Virginia to its 3rd consecutive conference championship while he was there. So Aiden Mahaney is on this list. I think that's an interesting one, and I don't mean to demean Aiden. I think Aiden's on this list if he stays at St. Mary's too. I think he's got that type of cachet, and I think when you look at the list of players, you got like Hunter Salas from Wake Forest, you've got Zeke Mayo at Kansas, Caleb Love at Arizona, preseason All-American. Boogie Flan from Arkansas, Janelle Davis from Arkansas, Caleb Foster, Con Knipple from Duke. You know what my biggest thing is? I feel like for some of the guys like Boogie, and people are going to think I'm always talking about Duke, whether it's a Duke guy or an Arkansas guy. I'm not sure if there's another freshman on here. I think, again, it goes back to whether it's Solo, whether it's Jalen Stewart or whoever. If you're considering Jalen a wing, maybe he's not on this list, but if you think Solo is a shooting guard, I think he deserves to be on this list. If you're just talking about a watch list, right? Watch out for these guys. Don't put freshmen on here because they haven't done anything in college. And so what,
one of the things to remember about this list is that players can play their way on and off the list throughout the year.
Yep.
So this list will change. It's long. It's got about 20 names on it. So Aiden Mahaney, I think, will stay there. He's going to produce at UConn. He's going to get the chance to produce at UConn. He's going to have, big enough minutes to stay somewhere on this list. You'll have some guys that fall off and some other names you might not know that play their way onto this list throughout the season. To that point, someone like Solo Ball is a player that could find his way onto this list by midseason. So I'm excited to see how that plays out, and how kind of the rosters end up shaking out, who ends up starting the season, who's starting the season come mid-season. Is it Solo? Is it Aiden Mahaney? Is Aiden going to run the point when he comes in, or is he going to play more of a 2-role? So I'm excited to see how it plays out. There's some big-time names on this list that are going to be there in the end. I'm really excited to see I think everyone in UConn Nation is excited to see what Aiden brings to the table this year. Is he going to be that kind of, scrappy guy like Cam Spencer was last year that ended up being a really important player for the national championship run and ends up getting himself drafted to the NBA? So we'll see.
Yeah, and my last comment is before we go is all I want is Solo to have a monster year so that Dan Hurley can say, "You guys don't know ball." That's the bottom line. Like that's what I want. And funny. Most people picking preseason All-American and all this other stuff just don't know ball, huh? And I think that's
all don't lie. All don't lie.
I think that's going to be that mic drop moment that he loves to do. But man, hey, thanks for joining. I really appreciate you jumping on. And anybody that watched, go check it out. Go check out YouTube channel. Make sure you're subscribing to the audio show. If you haven't looked at anything on Exit 68, go check it out now. He's got some good stuff on there, and this shirt is from there, by the way. So. And just to give you that heads up. But hey, this has been another episode of Locked On UConn. For Dan Meehan of the Exit 68, Mark Zanetto saying, stay locked on, stay connected, make sure those toughness meters always rise. And as always, go Huskies.